So we have some time for a conversation. You surely have noticed that a conversation is already going on between these papers. The first two are predicated on a presupposition that violence is bad. And the third is not so sure. For the third, perhaps violence is the midwife of history. We want to hear from the audience and then let the speakers fight it out amongst themselves. Please.
Hi, can you hear me, John?
Yes, now I can. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you all three for your presentation, which were very interesting. John, I had a few comments/questions because I was very intrigued by your presentation because you talked about robots, but robots are not people, but robots are made and function only thanks to people, and people were completely absent from your presentation. Like when you said, and it struck me, people are in settings increasingly controlled by intelligent technologies. People aren't. People are in settings increasingly controlled by companies who make the intelligent technologies. And that's what struck me the most, is that when you discussed how cute robots were, maybe I don't have strong feelings of hate or love towards robots, but the reason people degrade robots is not that people are monsters who see something cute and are like, oh, I'm going to push it into traffic. The reason people degrade robots, such as robots who act as cops, is because we live in an increasingly surveillance state, like in the US, and people are fighting back against that. And you can't fight back against the human cops because he's going to put you in jail. You can push a cop robot in the pool. And these are militant acts. And also, I think the fact that people degrade robots in the office is not hatred, and it's not a hate crime, because hate crime are against people and robots are not people. They're made by people. They cannot function without people, but they're not people. People degrade robots in the office because people degrade their office. They degrade the chair, the desks, they poop on office time. So of course they're going to degrade robots because robots have the same social consideration as chairs. And so that hardly made sense to me, what you were saying, because once again, robots cannot be put in the same category as people, and so behavior towards robots are not equivalent to behavior towards people. The reason being that very few people will push other people into traffic, and when they do, it's criminalized. And there was also, you talked about ChatGPT, and that kind of exemplifies my point, is that ChatGPT is not autonomous. If ChatGPT were autonomous, it would cease to function in 2 days, and it would produce only child pornography. Like ChatGPT functions only because in California and in Kenya, there are hundreds of workers who are not paid, what French sociologist Benjamin Casali calls click workers, workers who click, who have to control ChatGPT so that people who input write child pornography, ChatGPT cannot produce that. It's thanks to the people behind it, who are not the people in charge, but the people who are exploited. And it's the same with all of technology, particularly internet and numeric technologies. These are brown people, often brown women, who are not qualified, who are very little paid, who are exploited by these companies to make the robots. And my last point before I talk too much was you talked about, it's a subject that interests me a lot, so that's why I have thought about it. You talked about robot battlebot being violence. If we forbid robot battlebot, should we forbid boxing? It's two people hitting each other, sometimes only until one of them loses consciousness. There is such a thing as victimless violence when this violence is consented. It's the case in sport. People get their arm broken in sport, their nose broken, and it's victimless violence because people have consented to this, and the people who made the robot have consented to the robot being destroyed. So that was also a source of interrogation. And lastly, and after that I swear I'm done. I would have liked to know your thought about the Luddite revolution. they alluded, for those who don't know, were textile worker in 19th century England when textile machines were provided by companies, and they revolted and destroyed those machines. And people, the company owners, said, "Ooh, it's because they're poor people. They hate technologies." It was not. It was because the machine was stealing job. The machine was not stealing job. The people making and selling the machine were, in fact, stealing jobs from those people. And also because by using the machine, their salaries were going to drop considerably. And I see a parallel. I mean, to me, it's the same kind of revel that happened between the Luddites and the people you described today who not fight against robot, but complain about robot.
Thank you very
I'm
much.
so sorry.
So we have I suggest we take a few more questions. One question already asks to kind of bring politics into the picture, which is a very welcome intervention. Let's take a few more.
I could provide some very quick answers to
Joanne, we're doing a round and collecting a few questions, and then...
I wasn't sure what was happening. I'm sorry.
Sorry.
Thank you for all your lectures. They were all fascinating.
Raise your
okay.
voice a little bit. Yeah.
Can you hear?
Yeah.
Okay, I have a follow-up on your series of questions. And I think at least most of us would agree that violence against something is based on the fact that that thing can feel pain. So as for your point, violence against robots is different from violence against humans. And there was some kind of like maybe a hidden supposition that the two are equivalent. So I'm like with you on that point. But I think there are maybe some liminal cases where robots like become more human. And you can see that, for example, in Clara and the Sun. Where you have, I think for me at least, the more interesting cases are when robots become more human, and where do you draw the line there? Is like when does violence against an object become like equivalent to other sorts of violence? Is it when the object of that violence can feel pain? Is the line drawn on consciousness, or is there some other line? So thank you.
Thank you. So we have 1, 2, 3 for the first round, and then we'll hopefully have time for a second round, so please be concise.
Yes. Okay, so I have two questions, one for Rachel and one for Ari. For Rachel, it reminded me of many terms that we hear in the Israeli mainstream media, such as chisul, which is assassination, but it's not real. It's
Extermination.
Extermination, yes. Or mechabel, which is, I don't know how you translate.
Terrorist.
It's not really a terrorist, but something else. Sabotager, yes. So I was also interested while you spoke about the different metaphors you use to dehumanize populations. It reminded me of the cancer metaphor when you use it on populations, human population, and when you treat it as a conceptual metaphor, and the metaphors of viruses also about whole populations. And what I wanted to ask you is do you think that to break this cycle of dehumanization, the victim must use actually violent resistance? Because something is very interesting about all those metaphors is that they seem to me as to describe someone as being weak, even though cancer, you can't say cancer is weak, but you never dehumanize someone by saying that he's a lion or he's a tiger or he's an elephant or something like that. So I'd like to hear your thoughts. And for Ari, while you spoke, I was thinking about the theoretical question of can systemic violence take place without a physical actual violence? Is it possible? And I think that this question should have to account for the threat of physical violence. You don't have to use violence, but you can always have a threat of physical violence. And when you talked about the certain, extreme cases of physical violence, I remembered the case of Muhammad Abu Khdair, which the Palestinian child who was burned to death. I think it's a manifestation of an extreme violent society. When you have only one case is enough, because it's very rare to see this kind of brutality. Right. So I think it's a kind of a statistical question, if you know what I mean. But that's it. Thank you.
Thank you. So let's take it by the order of the presentations. Joanne, if you can limit yourself to 2 minutes, we will have time for a second round.
2 minutes. Thank you for the amazing questions, and I'll try to get back to the people who asked them if I'm not clarifying enough. I am very concerned about the fact that we are, as humans, becoming robots, robotic in so many different ways. If I lose an arm, I get a robotic prosthesis. If something happens to my brain and I get a stroke, I can have Neuralink connect various parts of my body. And that's what I'm worried about, that we are the boundaries between humans and robots. So what we are doing to robots is, as the instances that I related in my paper show, that violence, that lack of consideration for humanity, that's being reflected upon humans. Whatever we did to robots, again, reflected onto humans. I'm very concerned about the production of trauma related to robots, and this amorphous anxiety related to not only robots, but AI and autonomous vehicles, and this pumped up sense of angst that is reflected in so many different, movies and again, the battle bots and publications and video games, all of that. I'm wondering how it will be. I gave some examples, but I would like to expound more with people who'd like to correspond with me, how it is going to be used opportunistically to pressure us into decisions we might not otherwise make in a capitalistic sense, etc. What I'm worried about, again, is how the notion of consensual violence. We can get into boxing and whether or not something is really consensual in terms of human sport and injuries. We've had so many problems in the United States with concussions, and that's another deal. But what I'm worried about, the human use of human beings, is what I would like to be focusing on, which I'm borrowing a title from one of my mentors who is long gone. How we can indeed think of humanity in a sense that is special and is not steeped in the robotic lore that is part of every child's upbringing in so many dangerous ways. So again, thanks for the amazing questions.
Thank you very much. Rachel.
I'll try to remember everything everyone said too. But to start with, I think that the chart I briefly showed animalistic and mechanical dehumanization, and it does seem to tend that animalistic dehumanization goes towards small things as well. Like you said, it's not necessarily lions, but it's cockroaches, it's rats, it's disgusting animals, things like this. But I don't necessarily think that they don't use strong things. Like, I don't know, we do also see people being called demons and satans and having too much power, and that is the kind of opposite in that regard, more into the mechanicalistic dehumanization. But I think there are specific narrative techniques that are used for various reasons, probably culturally and historically dependent as well. What is the fear? What group of people is trying to become the oppressor, and which group is the oppressed? So I think it is very, very dependent on the situation. I do justify violence in many ways. I think in my presentation I talked about negative violence, but I wasn't trying to suggest that violence equals bad inherently. You talked briefly about kind of this rewriting of history as being nonviolent. Like now when we think in U.S. context, I'm talking about MLK being nonviolent when he at the time was considered very violent, and like you say, suffragettes were very violent, and now when we talk about history, it's, oh, they just showed their bras and that's all they did, and then they got the vote, and that's just simply not what happened. So I do definitely think that violence is necessary in many regards. And then, sorry, I don't think I'm answering every question that was raised, but hoping to. I've passed my 2 minutes, but I'm going to claw it back from earlier. And finally, animal violence. I instantly think of events where perhaps a coyote has wandered in and killed chickens, or a polar bear has wandered in and stolen food, or perhaps a shark has killed someone swimming. And the response to that is always to euthanize the animal. I mean, it's not a case of, oh, we just let the tiger, it's fine, the tiger won't come back. It's always really to search out, even if it's in the case in Canada of going out and killing 50 wolves and hoping that one of them is the wolf that killed the kid. It's just always human life over animal life in that regard. But I also I'm not proposing that we value animals over human life either. In any regard, and that is, I think, also a slippery slope where it does happen, of course, that a Pomeranian's life might be more valuable when they are the ones who are fed properly and cared for, and we don't care for the community members that are unhoused. I don't know if I answered any of the questions you guys raised. I just kind of said some things, but thank you.
Thank you, Ari.
Abu Khdir. I don't remember if there was what was the response in the Israeli public to Abu Khdir. Was there a movement? I know that, for example, Sabra and Shatila, which was did galvanize for a brief moment a protest movement in Israel. So. It's interesting what you said about exceptional violence. Kind of, we accept regular violence, which is terrible. But when it goes like over the top, suddenly people are willing to start participating or starting to politicize themselves. I think that's an interesting, sad but interesting observation. Perhaps just one added comment about fossil fuels in the world, right? It's very abstract. We didn't grow up on it. It looks unreal in many respects. It's hard to make it concrete. It's very structural. It's so structural, it's abstract, right? Some place will become warmer, some place will become very hard to visualize it. But I think that when we think about changing this system, which will certainly be very horrendous to billions of people, especially in the global south, we have to imagine that it would be, just like you said, a very protracted affair, just like getting rid of slavery in the US or women or winning the vote for women. I don't think that the analogy that we think from Erica Chenoweth or from the 3% population going out into the streets is a good analogy, because in that analogy we're talking about just a regime change. With petroleum, it's more like slavery. It's a way of life for a whole society. It has built-in very, very deep interests in the economy, in companies, etc., etc. So I think that if the environmental movement wants to achieve some kind of gains, I think there is an argument that it needs to at least destroy new carbon-producing property or make it costly to introduce that kind of new property into the circulation of the world.
Okay, thank you very much. And the structural violence of the clock is what allows us to function as a society and to shift gears from panel to panel. So join me in thanking our three presenters.